This is the second year that we are hosting and having a discussion in honor of Women's History Month. And we are honored this year to have a panel of speakers that can discuss a very important issue to all of us, the gender wage gap. Today on our panel, we have Sigma Upsilon Sigma, which is a women's club at NECO focusing on enhancing professional and leadership development and broadening networking opportunities, especially for women in optometry. The executive committee of Sigma Upsilon Sigma was instrumental in helping plan this evening's event. So I want to make sure that we introduce everyone. Elizabeth Riffle is the president and founding member of the club. Lizzie, as I know her, will be helping us moderate and she'll be helping us lead the discussion today. Jamie Windsor is the vice president and Carly Stevens is the events coordinator. All three of these members just finished their board exams. So I want to highlight that as well, that this is a big endeavor for them to jump into right after such a big event in their lives. So thank you guys. Angelina Wang is the OD2 president of the club. And Manuela Jambrina Escobar is our first year club representative. And Manuela will be leading us with the Q&A this evening. Secondly on our panel is Dr. Dr. Ham, welcome. Thank you for joining us after a very busy day of travel. Dr. Ham is the Senior Manager of Optometry Engagement at Luxottica. She is a graduate of UMSL, or the University of Minnesota St. Louis College of Optometry. Dr. Ham is passionate about optometry and about women's equality. In fact, actually, during optometry school, I didn't know this, but she told me this when we met the first time. She initiated a research project that has become one of the only published research papers investigating the gender wage gap in optometry. Her work has been published in the Journal of Optometry and Vision Science in 2020. So we'll have the honor of hearing Dr. Ham speak to us tonight about her area of expertise. Next on our panel is Dr. Karen Carrasquillo. Carrasquillo is president of Clinical and Professional Affairs at Boston Sight. Boston Sight is a specialty clinic, actually just in the greater Boston area. And it's a specialty clinic that offers, and also a research center that provides corneal treatment and customized and state-of-the-art treatment and medical devices. Dr. Carrasquillo earned a PhD in chemistry prior to optometry and prior to her residency in cornea and contact lenses. She's now considered an expert in the field of contact lenses, and she's authored numerous publications in the field, and she now lectures internationally on advanced contact lens topics. She's also adjunct clinical professor at NECO. We're honored to have her, and at MCPHS. So we're very honored to have Dr. Carrasquillo share her stories and her expertise in the field as a leader in the field of optometry today. And finally, and definitely not last, is Dr. Quy Nguyen. Dr. Nguyen is the Executive Director of Career Planning and Development and Minority Enrichment at SUNY College of Optometry. He earned his optometry degree at SUNY and following graduation spent 3 years practicing in an ophthalmology practice in New York and in Brooklyn. Today, he spends his time writing and lecturing to help optometry and pre-health minority students. He's reviewed numerous contracts and works to equip his students to process fair contracts and to negotiate and to empower themselves. So I can't think of anyone better to join us and to equip us to know better about this topic than Dr. Nguyen. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you for giving us your evening. I'd like to now pass the mic over to Lizzie or Elizabeth. Elizabeth is going to be helping us moderate this evening. So I will pass this on to her. Thank you, Lizzie.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for the introduction, Dr. Liao. Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be the moderator for the evening. Just a very quick announcement before we really dive into things for the night. If anybody has any questions for any of our panelists or any questions at all throughout the whole night, we're going to have a Q&A section at the very end, and you can save them for the end and just ask them then, or you can post them in the Q&A function throughout the night, and we'll get to them at the end. I'm going to go ahead and hand things over to one of the biggest authors of the wage gap in optometry, Dr. Ham. Dr. Ham, you can go ahead and take it away.
Y'all are too kind to me. I have some slides here because what would a presentation be without any slides, y'all, right? So I'm from Kansas, if you couldn't tell by my y'alls, and I'll introduce myself a little bit more. So my name is Dr. Kate Ham. I graduated from UMSL in 2019, and I currently serve as a senior manager of OD engagement at Luxottica. which is a big fancy title to say that I get to help doctors feel really excited about going to work every day. So it's kind of the best job in the world. Was in private practice for about a year and a half before I moved into this role. And I love patient care as well. I think the coolest thing about optometry is that we have so many ways that we can impact patients' lives and impact doctors' lives and impact other people in our community. And so I am just really fortunate that I have been able to do that in a lot of ways. So a little bit of background on kind of where all of this started. So when I started optometry school, I was pumped because I started out as an elementary education major. And so I thought my paycheck was going to be like $0 for the rest of my life. And I was pretty cool with that. And then right before I started student teaching, I was in a physics class and I decided I changed my mind and changed my majors to optometry. Then I saw the paycheck and I was like, yes, thank you. This is fantastic. Like, what a big win. Like, changing my major, like I got a huge pay raise. Also a lot of student loans, which is a part of it. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, but it was a big wake up call for me to see that like, this is an opportunity where I could make a lot of money. So as I started optometry school, I met someone named Dr. Rachel Simpson, who is my partner in crime. She's my business bestie. She and I are two peas in a pod when it comes to a lot of things. And she called me during our winter break. During our winter break, driving home, she lives in Pennsylvania. She was driving to St. Louis, and she called me and she's like, "This sucks." And I was like, "Okay, sure, what sucks? Like school, I don't know." And she told me about the wage gap with an optometrist. He was like, at the time, and we'll kind of go over these numbers in a second, 56% of a wage gap. So what that means is men made 56% more than women in optometry. I was like, what? Hold on, I could be making like a lot more money than what I'm going to make out of school. And both of us decided that we wanted to close the wage gap before we graduated optometry school. Unfortunately, we did not do that. But what we did do is we started to do put a lot of time and energy in researching this, because the best way that we know as optometrists and as scientists, if we have a question, is to be able to put it through the ringer, ask a lot of questions, gather data, and then put it through all of our statistical analysis so that we can really understand the data really well. And that made sense in our brains, as well as it gave us a really good background to be able to talk about the wage gap and know what does it really look like. We've seen polls where it's 50%, we've seen polls where it says 56%. And so what does it look like when we do a lot of the statistical research? So that's kind of where my background is. So within that, we started a podcast with Defocus Media called Lunch Date with Rachel and Kate. We've written lots of articles and talked a ton about negotiation of the wage gap. So we're going to kind of first start about like, what is the gender wage gap? I talked about it a little bit, but AAUW put it really, really well. So the AAUW is an organization where they are working on closing the gender wage gap as well, and do a lot of negotiation training courses. And so how they state it in all their courses is, simply put, the gender pay gap is the gap between what women are paid and what men are paid. So this is on average. We're going to average every single dollar that women have made. We're going to divide it by the number of women we've got in the world. Well, in the United States, we can do it in a lot of places, but we're going to just do the United States. So all the dollars that women make in the United States, divided by the number of women. Same thing with men. And then we compare those two numbers. So that's how we're coming up with the gender wage gap in total. If you are like me, you're like, this is not good research, right? Like, there are women that are working 2 hours a week. There's women that are working 89 million hours a week. Like, there is a lot of variety and there's a lot of range in those numbers. So we've got some ways that we can talk about the wage gap. We've got explained and unexplained wage gap. So the explained is like the hours worked. So if you work part-time, your pay is going to look different on a yearly salary basis compared to somebody that works full-time. Like, that's just kind of how the cookie crumbles. It can be the type of work. So you'll hear a lot of arguments in a lot of different spaces where we'll talk about the different types of work. A lot of people say that women, there is research behind it. We're not making claims that are just kind of out of nowhere, but women might choose professions that are lower paid, such as a majority of teachers are women, a majority of nurses are women, and those are lower paying compared to, let's say, a doctor or a university professional. So you can kind of see where we can compare some of those where it's like, well, women are just not in that profession, which is baloney. We know that. And two, that can be where some of those explained places are. Time left from work. So since women's bodies are the only types of bodies that, since biologically, women's bodies are the only types of bodies that can carry babies, and there's recovery process after it. There can be some time that is taken off from work for that, for maternity leave, as well as if a woman, a lot of times in our society currently, women are the ones that are going to be more likely to stay at home if there are children at home, if there is a need if there's a child that has more needs, or if there is, let's say, somebody that needs to make the sacrifice to stay home because cost-wise that's going to make more sense. More times than not, it's a woman. As well as career length, which goes into the time left from work. Women might not be in the profession that they've chosen as long as maybe their male counterparts within different positions, as well as flexibility. So let's say you're like, I only want to work 3 days a week because I want to do X, Y, and Z on the other 2 days. And women might choose that option more often than men. So these are things that people say, aha, I solved it. This is why we have a gender wage gap. This is it. But there are pieces that can't be explained away. So when we did our research, so kind of a background on our research. So this was a survey that we sent out through Facebook, emails, anywhere that anybody was an optometrist that was willing to take our survey. We had them do that. So that was really exciting. We had over 1,000 responses with 800 usable responses. As we know with research, not all data that you receive is going to be data that can be actually synthesized into everything because it might not have all the pieces you need or things of that nature. So this is the portion that can't be explained away by any factors. If you take every single one of these factors and strip it away and you compare down to those numbers of what a man makes and what a woman makes, in optometry, we have a 3% difference. So women make 3% less than men in general without any factors coming into play. So most of the time, that unexplained portion of the wage gap can also be considered some sort of unconscious bias or discrimination. That can feel really big right now when I say that, because you're like, wait, no, we have more women in optometry than men. Like, how can people be discriminating? Like, this is crazy. We'll talk a little bit more in this next slide about this kind of like our unconscious bias, as well as a couple other things that play into this. So unconscious bias are those things that are ingrained in us in a place where we don't even consciously think about it. So one way I kind of think about it is when you might hear of somebody getting into a car accident, in your brain, you might have a specific type of person, somebody, a specific age, a type of car. You might have a lot of preconceived notions of what happened there. When really, since we don't know, it could be a completely different. But your brain automatically goes to a place first. So that's like kind of your unconscious bias, or things that you think about a person. It could be a gender, a racial background, an ethnicity, a gender identity, sexual orientation, any of those things that you think about. You're like, I already know what they're going to be like here. So unconscious bias is a piece of our puzzle. And it's hard for us to be able to tackle it globally because it's not something we think about all the time, every day, something. So this is a piece that we as a world and as a community need to think about. Another one is it says double blind, and that's crazy because it's supposed to say double blind. But double blind is kind of funny because we're not optometrists. So maybe I did that on purpose, actually. So double blind is where when we are looking at, let's say, a woman negotiating. So a woman that is being very direct, she's sharing what she wants, and she's being aggressive in what she would like. A lot of times that gets a negative connotation. Whereas if, like, let's say a man does that, they're aggressive in what they want. They go in there and they're assertive. They're looked at as, man, they're a leader. Whereas a woman does that, they're like, man, that woman, she's really negative. She's not a team player. So that's our double blind. Whereas we might be doing the same exact thing, but we're viewed in two different ways. This also can happen when just expectations in society. So what a woman is expected to do versus a man, and our gender identities and roles and how all of those interplayed with each other. How one person does something and how they get perceived might look completely different than a man when they do that and it's perceived. The last thing that we're going to talk about, and we're going to actually tackle this one today together, is wage transparency. Talking about money kind of sucks. I don't know how many of you talk with your friends about money all the time. If you're like, how much you make, how much you pay in rent, how much you spend on food, what debt you have, all of those things. Like I don't do that on a daily basis. Talking about this. That's a complete and total lie. I really do. But that's because I've taken myself to it. So if one day you'll be like me, it'll be great. So what happens is we don't talk about who is making what. So then when I go and apply for a role and they say, I'm going to give you $50,000 to be an optometrist here, 5 days a week, you have to work 70 hours a week. Man, in my brain, I'm like, well, that must be the going rate. But then maybe my counterpart is making $100,000. And you're like, man, if I would have known, I could have said, hey, this is the market rate. This is the market value. This is where we're at. So if we're not talking about those money and we're not talking about the wages, it's really hard for us to know what is fair and what is good. So that way, that wage gap is still persisted because we don't know and we're not talking about it. So a lot of those gaps stick out because nobody's talking about how, what those numbers are to close them. All right. So now we're going to get down to the good nitty gritty stuff. So this is the wage gap in optometry. So the gray graph on the side can be a little hard to see, and I apologize for that. It's our best one where it has everything put together. This came from our research that was done. So a little background. So our research was pulled, the survey was pulled in 2018. Our data was fully synthesized and we went through our statistics in 2019 and then fully published in 2020. So it takes a little bit, like 2018, it was like about a 6-month process to go through IRB and a lot of different things. I guess it was end of 18, early 2019. So you have to go through IRB, so the research board, a lot of different pieces that we can make sure that it's a good study. And then we can complete the study. Then statistics, man, people are so smart. Those take a while. Like we had to do a lot of work there. And then writing a publication takes a bit and then having it peer reviewed. So this is where we are. I think you'll find a couple of things really interesting here. I'm talking about that great graph. The Midwest salary starting. So this is, you're going to see starting and you're going to see current. So starting is when somebody walks out of optometry school, their first day on the job. This is the salary that I started with. So the first day on the job. So you can even see on the first day of the job, women are already behind. It's about an 8.7% wage gap when we just start out. Man, that kind of sucks. Then we have overall current. So that's about a 12% wage gap. So it almost doubles. Not quite. I know it's a little math, a little fuzzy there. So when we go to that current, that is, if I came to you today, I went to all optometrists today, that's what they're currently making. So that's kind of what those two data points look like. Interestingly enough, you'll see the Midwest starting is pretty much zero. Kind of fascinating. Our next steps in a lot of our research is like kind of digging into some of the data that we found. So the Midwest starting is pretty much zero. In West, it's super interesting. Women actually make 9% more than their male counterparts. Also really interesting, going to dive into that too. But in general, I mean, if we talk about the Midwest current, like they start out about the same, but man, if we talk about where people are today, that's different. These other two numbers on the side can tell you a little bit about how some of these numbers can be hard because these are self-reported surveys. And so this is just like numbers where they average things together and it's just a self-reported survey. These are great. We need all of these numbers together when we look at the wage gap because there's going to be different people reporting different data at different places because there's a lot of different avenues. So in 2020, we have two numbers here. So this one is, so this top one is from, so it's like, why can't I remember the title? So the first one is from like Rev Optometry. And so that's going to be one space. And then Women in Optometry is the bottom one. So that's where so those are two data points. So you can kind of see, depending on the data and how you synthesize that data. We worked really hard to make sure that we went through things really statistically correct because how much we saw these fluctuations. So we've talked about the wage gap. We know what the wage gap is. We know why it could possibly happen. We know a little bit about those unexplained portions of the wage gaps. And now we kind of know what it looks like overall. Now I want to talk about what things look like when we cross more than one piece of the puzzle together. So we have a male to female gender wage gap. Then we have a lot of other pieces. When we start to add in any other backgrounds to these, to our pieces of the wage gap, things really start to jazz up and change. So as you can see, this came from AAUW again. So AAUW has they do a survey every year of all professionals. So this is not optometry specific because currently there's not an optometry specific intersectionality wage gap analysis. So this is just looking at everybody in general. And why I like this graph for two reasons. One, you can see where we start from 1988 all the way up to 2020. So like this is a really good gap, a really good amount of time. You'll always see data about 2 years behind because have to wait till 2020 ends and we process the data in 2021. So that's why we see kind of a year behind there. So you can see a lot of different groups of people and their comparison to where a percentage of the wage gap they are compared to a white man. So you can also see here equity. Where are we going to equal pay? What year will that be? And man, can we talk about this number down here for our Hispanic female counterparts? Man, that sucks. 2451. Like, I don't even know how to say that number because we're not even that far in things yet. So, man, this is a really fascinating graph. I want us to take us back to some of our unexplained portions of the wage gap, as well as explained. There might be pieces where individuals might choose different professions based on familial ties or different things, or cultural ties and things. That can be something that's passed down over time. There also can be some unexplained portions where we're looking at that double bind again. So where how people, gender, ethnicities, racial backgrounds, all of those next steps. So we have our gender and then our next step added on top of it, of another portion of who we are. That can be the way that people are looked at with that double bind, and how they're perceived can impact how somebody might choose to pay them. We can also look at that unconscious bias again. Then also wage transparency. Each person in their culture might view talking about money and wages differently. And that's okay. But how can we address that so that way we're making sure that our counterparts are really getting taken care of? All right. Now we're into the good stuff. So how much like do you make when you get out of school? Like, that's a question that Rachel and I were obsessed over, because honestly, I didn't want to underpay myself. I didn't want somebody to underpay me. So we can kind of see where we are here. So we've got all of our wage gap. So we've got our overall starting, and then all of our other levels through here. So we kind of did some larger just groups on starting and different sizes. So then you can see with women's average salary and men's average salary here. Why is the women's salary crossed out? Because we're not asking for that. No way. I'm not going to be like, I'm just going to wait around and I'm just going to see if they're going to give me the larger number. Whenever we're going to go into negotiation or something of that nature, we're going to ask for that larger number. So this is from our data. I'm going to tell you that there is numbers that change frequently in all of this. There are some really great resources and places where you can learn and ask more questions about weight. A really great one for optometry is Eyes on Eye Care. They do a salary and job and just overall kind of compensation, career, profession overview every year. That's a really great place to check things out. Another really great place that I love is the Labor Bureau of Statistics by the United States government. Why I like this is because I have to report on my taxes how much I make, right? It's illegal. I legally have to do this, and I'll get in trouble if I don't. As well as your employer has to as well report what they're paying you. So at the end of the day, that's going to be really great information about what people might be making in your area. And they have it broken down by profession, where you might live. They've got a lot of different components. So that's a really great place to look. There's also, our research is really fantastic. If you look up wage gap optometry, we are one of the first things to pop up. I think it's an article that I wrote, and then for another publication, and then this, and then our article that we have in our journal publication of optometry vision science. You can look there. You might see places like salary.com or glassdoor.com. Those are great, but they are self-reported. So I always like to take those with a grain of salt, because I might say I make $50 million, but do I? No, not quite. So I always take it with a grain of salt to kind of understand the numbers might be inflated a little bit. So last thing, before we kind of go to all our questions, what can we do to close the wage gap? There are a few things. There are a ton of things that we can do, but there are a few things that we can do today, right now, tomorrow. One, talk about pay transparency. There's a couple ways we can do this. One, talk about it with your friends. Legitimately, I talk about it with people all the time. What are you making? I have a group thread with my friends from optometry school, and whenever somebody's looking at a new job or they're looking at maybe a negotiation for a raise, we talk about pay and we talk about what people are making, because that way we know we're going to get paid fairly. because we know what the market value is. Also on pay transparency, one other thing a lot of places push for is posting the salary onto the job description. That way people know what they're walking into and don't accidentally lowball themselves. The next thing is unconscious bias training. So this can be in your life, this can be in where you work, where you go to school, within your family, whatever that looks like. Being able to understand where those unconscious biases come from and how to confront them on a daily basis. I will say this is one of the hardest things to do because it's foundational to who we are a lot of times, and we don't even realize it. And so it's hard work. While it might do a really big piece to close the wage gap, it's also one of the hardest things to do. But I believe in each and every one of you that you could do that. Another piece is negotiation. In our research that we found that negotiation does close the wage gap. Not dramatically enough to make it down to zero, but there is some closing. A really cool piece of it is that when we looked at both genders negotiating. So with that, women, when they negotiate, they received a higher increase in their pay. So when they asked what they asked for, it was larger than what they asked for and received is larger than what the men asked for and received, which is super cool. But there's still the pay gap at the end of the day, because even when the women negotiated a lot more, the men, even when they negotiated a little bit, still started off at a higher level than women. I'm going to say that one more time in a little bit of a different way, so hopefully that it can help if there's any confusion. So women, when they negotiate, they come in with their salary and they negotiate for a higher salary. Their negotiated salary is higher than the man's negotiated salary. But when the women and men start out, before they negotiate, the men already start higher. So when they negotiate, even if they're not as good, they still get to a higher level than the women do when they negotiate. So they still have that difference up at the top. Ask me some more questions on that. I can explain it maybe in like 70 different ways, possibly. The last thing that is an interesting concept, and there's a lot of controversy around it. I don't know if it's the right answer, but it is an answer that we've seen. It's kind of some flat pay rates. So when you come out and you join a practice, you say every person that comes in makes $105,000. Every starting optometrist, your first day you make $105,000. We don't negotiate, but every person makes that. There's some pros and cons to that, because if you can't negotiate, then are you getting fair market value? Don't know. But also, there's not going to be a gender wage gap there. And so that's an interesting spot where there is a lot of questions and trying to see if it's something that's worthwhile for us.
So hello, everyone. My name is Manuela Jambrina Escobar, and I'm an OD1, and I'm the co-president of Sigma Epsilon Sigma. We are so excited that everyone could come to hear this wonderful discussion we're about to have. So tonight's panel is presented by Dr. Liao. Dr. Liao is an assistant professor in the Department of Specialty and Advanced Care at the New England College of Optometry. She is also an attending optometrist in the contact lens service at NECO Center for Eye Care, and she is our wonderful advisor. Simone Jadzak is the Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging at NECO, and Addie Rose, the Administrative Assistant of Professional Affairs at NECO. Next slide, please. So Sigma Epsilon Sigma. Sigma Epsilon Sigma is a women's club at NECO focusing on enhancing professional and leadership development and broadening network opportunities, especially for women in optometry. This club was founded by Elizabeth Reifel, who is here helping facilitate the talk today. The executive committee of Sigma Epsilon Sigma was instrumental in helping plan this evening's event and is made up of myself, Angelina Wang, Jade Aruda. All members of Sigma Epsilon Sigma Executive Board are in their first and third years of optometry school. Angelina and Jade just finished part 1 of their boards, and we're really excited for them. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our speakers. So the first is Dr. Avani Dave. She is from Toronto, and she graduated from New England College of Optometry. She is the Director of Optometry Services at the Ross Eye Institute in Buffalo, New York. As part of her residency in special contact lenses, she did rotations at Mass Eye and Ear, BMC, Ophthalmic Consultants of Boston, Boston's Foundation for Sight, TLC Laser Eye Center, and NECO. She is the recipient of the NECO's Presidential Scholarship, and she won an award for excellence in contact lenses for Johnson & Johnson. She likes to travel and is a professional Indian classical dancer. Our second speaker is Dr. Vivian Yao. She graduated from the University of Melbourne, Australia in 2010. She worked at an ophthalmology practice and specialized in anterior segment disease. She managed the pre-op and post-op for ocular surgeries, including cataracts, LASIK, PRK, and cross-linking. In 2019, Dr. Yao completed her Doctor of Optometry from the Accelerated Program at NECO with clinical and academic honors. Currently, she is the director at Boston Eye Group, an ODMD practice. And our third speaker is Dr. Jacqueline Garlick. Dr. Garlick graduated from NECO and completed a residency in primary care and ocular disease at the St. Louis Veteran Affairs. She specializes in dry eye and ocular surface disease. She's a published optometrist and is the editor of Glance. She's a co-host of a podcast called To the Point, which helps other optometrists build their dry eye clinics. She is a major in the National Guard. Now I pass it along to Dr. Liao.
Thank you for the introduction, Manuela. So before we begin, I think it's important for us to understand or get a sense of what the audience thinks about work-life balance, because I think we all have a perception of what work-life balance is and we all strive for it, but our perceptions of it may be different. So we're going to launch a poll and there'll be two. So the first question is, how much of a factor is work-life balance in an optometry position you're considering? And for students, your future career choice. So the first option is, it's very important to me. I would not take a position that did not seem to provide a good work-life balance. The second is, it's important to me, but I would accept a position that may not seem to have good life balance if all other aspects of the position were attractive. Third is, it is somewhat important to me. I understand that I may not have good work-life balance in the position I choose. And the fourth is, it's not important to me. My work as an optometrist rules. So it looks like 65% of, as we expected, this work-life balance for everyone who would be attending is important. And so for most people in this audience, it seems like work-life balance is something that is a part of the position that they hope to have and a part of their life as an optometrist in the future. That's excellent. So now let's launch this next one. Looks like I can launch it now, Gary. So this is a multiple answer one. The question here is, what is work-life balance to you? So one is being able to enjoy life outside of work. Two is working 40 hours a week for a full-time position and no more than that. Three is feeling fulfillment in my work. Four is having flexibility in my work and work hours. And five is having the ability to balance multiple roles. Right. So a majority of people are most, what defines work-life balance for them is being able to enjoy life outside of work, but having flexibility as well as feeling fulfillment are just as important. I think we'll find that our discussion today does touch on all of these points. And so we wanted to first define all of this and really understand and break down what work-life balance was to everyone before we dove into our discussion today. So I will welcome the panelists to come on board with me here. And to start our discussion today, I wanted to just share that the idea for this talk this evening actually started after some reflection with some members in the NECO community about really what had changed after COVID and really how we're adapting to life after COVID, both professionally and personally. And especially that we can see now that there's so many people that had left the workforce, and a disproportionate number of these workers that had left the workforce since COVID are women. So this really led us to think about how balance in our lives have been skewed because of an event like COVID. And today we really want to talk about the challenges that come with this and really how to regain balance in our lives and our careers. So the first question that I wanted to pose is really, and to really begin our discussion about work-life balance, is talking about navigating challenges. And so my first question is for Dr. Garlick. One thing that shocked me when we were first chatting was that you had purchased a practice in January of 2020, and then 2 months later, COVID hit and you were forced to shut down your practice. So I was wondering, how did you manage a sudden challenge, and what advice would you have on tackling challenges out of your control when you look back at this?
Yeah, so when I bought this practice, obviously COVID wasn't at all on the radar. And so I think with any sort of crisis in your life, there is something good that can come out of that, right? Like, so you can think like the situation was pretty terrible. I, bought this practice. I had no cash flow reserves. Like I had nothing to really fall back on and financially. So it was pretty terrifying. And then I was put on orders for the military. So I was actually not even in my practice. It didn't matter actually, because we shut it down anyway. But all of that was actually, at the time, I was like very sweaty and just panicking and like, what am I going to be doing? What is happening? Why did I buy this practice? But in the long run, I actually look back and was like, that was actually not that COVID was a good thing, but the learning experiences that I got from COVID was actually very helpful. I learned what I needed and what I did not need in the practice. What bills could I pay? What bills did I not have to pay? Like, I'm not going to pay these frame bills. I'll send them all back if you need me to. Like, I don't have any cash flow, so I'm not going to pay that right now. It was sort of like figuring out your own finances. Let's say you suddenly lost your job. You're figuring out your own finances just to a little bit of a bigger scale. So in the short term, it seemed like really, really awful. But in the long run, I'm like, I really feel like I had a very steep, I jumped right into the deep end of business ownership, which the things that I learned in that short amount of time would have taken me a year to probably figure out or actually make the change. And then my hand was forced. So I had to make it with COVID. So although there are crises in your life, there is something good that will come of that. And there is a good learning experience. That has been my experience.
I love how you have taken something that is so negative and I think so shocking. I can't even imagine what it's like to have to navigate that so soon into buying a practice, and made into a learning opportunity. And I think that's definitely something that we all will come to see throughout this discussion of how everyone has learned through different challenges. Dr. DeVay, you too had your career kind of shaken up by COVID. But even prior to COVID, you had to pivot several times in your career because of just your goals to fulfill your dreams. So in your story with me, you had shared that you really had wanted to start, your first dream was to go to medical school. And then that timing wise didn't work out. And then your next dream was to live in New York City. That was your life goal. And although you had a position, you couldn't get the visa to work. And so that wasn't able to go through. And then you ended up managing work between juggling Toronto and Buffalo, so Toronto, Canada, and Buffalo, New York for almost 3 years. So can you tell me how COVID forced you to have to pivot again through your challenges and what kind of opportunities that opened for you?
Absolutely. So honestly, I think Jacqueline, Dr. Garlick, I really resonated with what you said, is that there's always a silver lining and everything happens for a reason. So for me, being able to travel back and forth 90 miles to 2 different countries and practicing on 2 different sides was a testament to me having opportunities where I had many doors closed in my face, and being Canadian and needing a visa. And so finally, when I did create opportunities and this arrangement between Toronto and Buffalo was working, COVID caused me to get stuck on one side of the border. And so physically, I couldn't get to the other practice. And it made me reevaluate what time I was spending at each practice, but also the amount of time I was spending in general in patient care. I was in clinic 6 days of the week, traveling way more than I like to, putting a lot of miles on my car. And so what COVID caused me to do was really evaluate this concept of work-life balance. And so I think for me, when I started my career coming out of residency, having so many doors closed, I had this adrenaline and this inertia to just want to keep working and doing and creating opportunities. And then eventually you start burning out of steam after a while. And COVID made me realize this concept of work-life balance. I was looking at the poll earlier, and I would have answered that very differently had I been a resident compared to what I am now, where for me, it was finding the best opportunities, seizing what I could take, what I had learned from my education, the time and the energy and the financial debt from being a student to make the most of the start of your career. And then 3 years later, to realize how much time and energy you were expending into your career and not really putting any time into yourself. And so while, some doors close and other doors open, COVID made me really understand this concept or this importance of work-life balance. And I mean, that's why it's just so lovely to be having this conversation now.
That's awesome. And that actually brings us to our next point very well, with Dr. Yao, that I wanted to ask her to share. So Dr. Yao's story really resonated with me because she, from the outside, seems like she has gone through a whole bunch of different things to get to where she is now. So Dr. Yao, I wanted to ask you to talk about fulfillment, because when I talk to you, you constantly seem like you feel so rewarded with your work, and it's a reward that you have cultivated in your work. And that seems like that's kind of the balance that you've created to make work and life balance well, because it's rewarding. But I wanted to share with the audience a little bit about your background. So Dr. Yao had practiced as an optometrist in Australia for 7 years prior to moving to the US. And she came to the US because she wanted to practice in the US. And in doing so, she needed to complete tons of immigration paperwork and also complete an intensive 2-year ACIP program at NECO, which I'm sure many of you are aware is very mentally, physically, and also financially demanding. And in addition to this, she had to uproot her professional and her personal life from Australia to do this. It's a decision that she said took about 6 months to make, which to me seems like a very short amount of time. But through all of it, she said that it's been very rewarding and she's had absolutely no regrets. And so, Dr. Yao, would you be able to tell us more about how fulfillment and reward in your work really helps you find this work-life balance that works for you?
Absolutely. So I think one theme that I'm hearing a lot from the other speakers as well is just mindset, how different situations or something that is a big upheaval like COVID can change your mindset about how you look at something or your outlook on work-life balance or, your career. And I think that's exactly what pivoted with me, was that going into optometry school the first time round when I graduated in 2009, in Australia, you go into a 5-year Bachelor of Optometry program straight out of high school. So at that age, you're looking for a career that's ticking the boxes you think you want at that time. And so, it seemed like, it ticked a lot of the boxes: stable jobs, stable income, interesting work. And then you really don't think about it beyond that. And so I was a mediocre student at best. And, afterwards, once I started practicing, I really did find that it is a profession that I enjoyed a lot. And so when my husband and I decided to move to the United States, I was faced with a choice. Do I either pivot and do something completely different and choose a different career path? Or do I double down and go really, back into optometry and keep at it? And clearly everyone knows the decision I made. But the second time round was a very different experience because it was my time, my money that I'm investing in this career now. And for the reasons that are very different to the first time, where I know what this is about. I know exactly what I'm going to do at the end of it and what life is going to look like and what the day-to-day is going to look like. So I went in with, I'm doing this for me this time. And so I became a much better student. And I think I got so much more out of it, both professionally and personally. And I think I spoke with you as well, Dr. Liao, that a lot of it is personal growth, even outside of optometry. The fact that you're moving to a new country and you are figuring out how even the banking system is different, just that the day-to-day things that you have known all your life is now different and you have to learn that. That I think builds a lot of character. And I feel like there are challenges that I feel like I can tackle now that, even 4 years ago, it would have been so daunting. And I think, like the other panelists were saying, it's just like with adversity comes a lot of growth, and it really builds strength. And so in regards to finding fulfillment, I think because I'm doing it for the right reasons and I am enjoying the work that I do, I do really enjoy this career and I feel fulfilled. So I think for any students at NECO that are about to enter into their career or starting out, it's so important to know why you're doing something and that you're doing it for yourself. And I think that that's going to lead to a lot of success.
Thank you. I think one thing that we're hearing consistently is really how these challenges and these huge pivots in life and career have really led to growing opportunities and ways to recognize your strengths and ways to make yourself better later on. Dr. Garlick, my next question is for you, and it actually touches on this as well. You had mentioned that when you first graduated, you were overwhelmed with student debt and you took a position that you didn't love in Milwaukee. You had moved to Milwaukee because of your husband. And so with that, it seems like you were able to take that challenging experience and grow from that and learn in future experiences really what you didn't like, but also what you really wanted. Can you share what you did to try and find those moments of fulfillment for you and how you incorporated them into your career?
Yeah, so for me, I ended up taking this job out of residency that I knew I didn't like, and I knew it wasn't a good fit for me, but that was like all that was open. I don't know what was happening, but there weren't a lot of jobs open at the time. And so it was in this suburb outside of Milwaukee. And I'm somewhat surprised by some of this poll that well, I guess not really. This talk is about work-life balance. So I guess everyone would sort of poll high on wanting a work-life balance, but I'm kind of with Avani. If I had just graduated, I was like going to take, I was like really into it. And like, I would take any job to try to get as much knowledge growth as what I could. Like I was like super, super into optometry. Not that I'm not anymore, but I just would have answered differently than I would like how I would answer it now. But I took this job knowing I didn't want it. And it was, you know, to be honest with you, I really disliked it. And I really even thought about like, why did this wasn't the profession that I really wanted, you know, like I really don't enjoy this. Like maybe I should have chose something else. I can't really make that move now. I have all of the student loan debt, which is how I worked myself into the military actually. But that job on paper was actually great work-life balance. Like I went to that job and I saw patients and they were all very easy. And if they weren't, I had no like tools at my office to do anything in terms of treatment. So I referred everyone out. So I literally saw the patients, went home at night, and I didn't have to think about anything else. Like it was very, very balanced, but in the same way, it also wasn't fulfilling to me. Like I had just come out of residency and I was really used to treating these higher level cases. And I just thought this really wasn't what I wanted. And I felt like I was losing my knowledge by just seeing all of these easier patients. And so in some ways, that is easy work-life balance, but I think it all comes back to what is like fulfilling to you and what is important to you. And this will change. Like that was, 10 years ago, or whatever. So this will change as you go forward. But I ended up knowing what I did not want. I know I did not want to see patients every 15 minutes. Like that was a no for me. I don't enjoy that. I don't even get to build a relationship with a patient. I know I wanted to work with an office that actually had equipment, like an OCT, for example. So I ended up finding a job in Milwaukee at an ophthalmology group that I really loved, and it was only part-time. And so I was like, oh God, I really need like full-time. Do I do 2 part-time jobs? But like I just persisted at it. And then eventually the other OD that was there left. And then I took his full-time job. And so it was like, it worked out, but it wasn't all quick. And I think your career is very much directly proportional to the effort that you put into it. So if you would like a kind of easier job, there's nothing wrong with that. If you want to see easier cases and not have to worry about things in the evening or think about things in the evening, you go that path. If you want something different, you go the other path, and you just have to put effort into either one of those things, depending on what you want. But eventually I found my way after sort of trying out this, and that didn't work. And so then I feel like my idea about optometry did a total 180 once I actually moved into a profession, like a practice that I really enjoyed. And then there was like a sort of creative outlet with me starting writing Glance that sort of provided another little aspect. And I will say none of that was work-life balance. That was a lot of work, but I found that very fulfilling and very rewarding. So I think work-life balance is different for everyone, you know?
Hello, everyone. Thanks for inviting me here. I feel like I should more share of what I did that you shouldn't do. And I've always worked at NECO, so I joined NECO at a very young age when I hadn't thought much about negotiation. And so I should have asked things about loan forgiveness and a signing bonus and paid more attention to retirement benefits. Lucky for me, everything worked out really well. But now in my position in managing the community health centers, my perspective is that I want to recruit somebody who's passionate about community health and academia and teaching and patient care. But nobody ever got rich in community health or academia. And so it's a special kind of person that I'm negotiating with. And I think that they recognize that there's certain salary structures you get in private practice versus a hospital setting versus a school or community health. And we know that you have to make a living. And so when I'm negotiating with the person does start with salary, but there's so much more than that. Usually we talk about whether they need a loan forgiveness plan and how that would work because they're working in a nonprofit sector. And our excellent retirement benefits and contributions on top of the salary that we give. And our awesome HR team, they talk about the benefits, that we have great insurance, FMLA policies. And so I think the process itself, we're kind of interviewing each other as we go through the interview process. And when we come down to the negotiation, for me, I've honestly given them an idea already of the ranges that I'm looking at because I don't want someone to waste their time. And they come in with a certain idea as well. And I'm able to say, here's the base salary, but let me tell you, on top of that is retirement contributions. Here's the benefits, and here's the amazing amount of time off that we have in academia. And we have funds for development for our faculty, and you get time off for that as well, and kind of give a picture of what life might look like. And so that person's able to picture that and kind of think about it. And eventually we come up with something that works for both of us. Sometimes it's not what they had thought, and that's fine too. But I think if something's important to someone, they should negotiate, but you don't negotiate just to negotiate because it can rub someone the wrong way if you're going at it too hard to negotiate for something that you didn't necessarily need as much. So you have to choose what you're going to negotiate for and be able to justify it so that that person knows it's important to you and for the right reasons. So hopefully that's a good start.
Thank you, Dr. Moy. And now to you, Dr. Hitchmuth. Oh, looks like you're muted there.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. Happy to be here. My pleasure. I don't know our first panelist, so hello, and thank you for supporting the NECO community. I'm a big fan of Dr. Moy, so always a pleasure to be in a room with her. I assume that the audience is largely students, correct? I just want to get clear on who I'm speaking to.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, great. So, I have been the boss, I guess, is the best category to put myself in for most of my career, starting from day one and sometimes by accident. And so what I think might be valuable for the audience is to understand what I'm thinking if they're coming to me for an interview. And I have interviewed doctors and employees of a wide variety in both hospital and private practice, even in corporate optometry over my years. And my best advice to all the ladies or anybody else who is approaching their first job, especially in the profession, is to, before you even start looking, think about what you want to achieve. If you understand what you want to achieve and you understand where you would like to be regarding salary, regarding your work hours, regarding investments for the future, regarding paying off your student loans, start from that point. I would say try to avoid stuffing, a number into a pigeonhole, so to speak, and try to find a job that fits that's never going to be a job that will offer the benefits that you want. So what do I mean by that? So for example, you can look up at any time right now what the typical salary is for academia, a doctor in academic practice, or a typical salary for a doctor in a community health center or in private practice or in a corporate setting. So you can get a range and get an understanding of what that looks like and what the typical benefits are. I definitely agree with the first panelist. Talk to a human resources person as well first, so that you understand what are the typical benefits, especially for the area that you may be looking for a job. So once you know where you want to be in your life, and you know where you want to live, if you're flexible, that's great too. But if you have those goals, where do I want to be? Where do I want to be in 5 years? Where do I want to be in 10 years? What do I think I'm worth right now? What do I bring to the table? Once you establish those things, I think then you can move forward in negotiations, right? So, for example, I'll give you some really specific examples. Or I'll maybe back up and say that for me, I'm in private practice now most of my time. I'm obviously VP of Clinical Affairs at a large corporation, but what's most important for me when I hire someone is that their skill set, their work approach, their teamwork approach, their work culture or experience, and how they view their teams at work is the number one most important thing. And if you come to me for an interview, the first thing I'm going to say is, what do you think how would you like your day to be? What would you like to experience in your work life? How does that fit into what you want to do when you're not at work? Paint for me a picture of what is meaningful to you. So that's how I start my negotiation, because quite frankly, I want to know, is this person going to be happy with what we have here in our office, in our setting, which is a large rural clinic with very medically complex elderly patients in a number of subspecialties. We don't have any retail. I'm very happy that VSP sponsored. We don't take vision plans. It's a business model that can support a certain type of salary. There'll be a certain culture associated with what your workday is like. It's very rewarding. You feel very needed. We all love each other here. But, again, what do you want your workday to be like? And then, what can a practice afford? So, there's for example, a per diem rate that we typically, or that sometimes we'll hire at a per diem rate here, sometimes we'll hire at a salary. We negotiate for pension benefits. We negotiate for healthcare benefits. There are some rules about how those benefits need to be allocated. There are laws actually, and I will share quite frankly with you that some practices, this is a little bit picking on probably a small minority, but some practices may not even be following the law or following the regulations. And they may not know it. I've seen that as well. They may not understand what it means to make sure you're offering, for example, family medical leave. I happen to live in a state, and this is just a little nugget, New Hampshire. This is a shameless sort of, come to New Hampshire kind of thing. But our state passed a program that allows either a male or a female or parent of any gender to participate in a Family Medical Leave Act program where they can pay into that program or your employer can pay. It could be half and half. So that's something that could be negotiated. For example, it may be very important to you if you know, because of where you are in your life, for example, that, in the next 2 to 5 years, you would like to have children. What does that look like? Where does that fit into your life work balance? Are you afraid that an employer won't hire you because you're in those childbearing years? In my time, that was a thing because there were certainly less females coming into the profession when I started than now. We invite that here. We have adapted, for example, our practice. What we do here is we hire, I happen to have all females, just worked out that way. We don't discriminate against our male colleagues. It just happened to be the way it's sort of worked out here. For example, I have sometimes a couple of or a few part-time moms who want to go, home early, or they want to fit their hours into the school day, or they want to work 2 or 3 days. And that is definitely negotiable as an example in my practice. As long as we can fulfill the needs of the practice and the community, and it matches what you may want in your own work life, then I would say it's negotiable. Things that are hard to negotiate too far off from the average of what the practice can sustain financially is your actual salary. There's some minimums. You can look these things up. You can ask your colleagues. Also keep in mind that, this is a very basic, but I find that people that are newer to the workforce don't understand that when you get a paycheck, add on to that at least 33% in additional costs for your salary. So there are payroll taxes. There are things that may come out of your check that go towards development or continuing educations or license fees. The list can be very long. It can be very short, but, and also your own benefits, healthcare benefits, and perhaps a pension or a savings benefit. So keep in mind that salary rate, there are additional costs, and think about what that may cost the practice and what they may be able to sustain. And what does that look like? How much revenue are you able to bring into the practice and generate? And will you even be, covering your costs, your salary plus costs? That's what I look at, right? Those are the exact numbers that I look at. How much can I pay this person? Because I want to pay them, especially if they're a good match clinically and experience wise, and their background and their, how they approach their work-life balance. I'm going to do everything I can to say, yeah, like, okay, this is what we can do. This is what we cannot do. Here are the negotiables. So I'm very upfront about it. I think some employers are not. I would say that it's highly variable in a corporate structure, in a corporate lease structure, in a private practice, or in a hospital, or in a community-based health center. So again, I'll go back to my initial statement, and then I'll take a pause. Think about where you want to be that makes you happy, the patients that you want to care for. Think about where you want to live and where you want to be in your life, and then work backwards from there, and then go get that job and go negotiate the best that you can for it.
Thank you.